Well, Mr. Mayor, it is 6 o'clock. I'm not seeing Councilmember DeLong, but
I'm here. I'm here.
oh, all right.
I'm working on my setup still.
All right. Would you like to start the meeting, Mr. Mayor? You're on mute, sir.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Notice an open work session to the City Council of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri, July 21, 2020. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you, sir. Tonight's work session is a work session that we always have around this time each year, as we're working on preparing the next year's fiscal city budget to present to you next month. We are seeking some direction tonight as to what rates to assume for water and sewer in the next calendar year. In the memo that was provided to you, we provided a little bit of background about pressure that began on the, we're talking about first about sewer rates, on the pressure that began on the water fund a few years ago when we discovered that our master meter, through which most of the city's flow goes on its way to Kansas City, was defective and needed to be replaced, and it was. And then when it was, we found that the recorded flows that had been being sent to Kansas City were being undercounted. And so we began seeing significantly higher flows and consequently significantly higher fees to Kansas City, Missouri, which has put a lot of pressure on the WPC fund. Another reason that we've identified that at times when we've had additional measured flows is that we've had high amounts of rainfall, which we believe has caused some inflow and infiltration, I&I it's called, and that has, it also puts water into the sanitary sewer system that goes to Kansas City and that we have to pay for. That's a reason all cities have I&I, and all cities work on bringing it down as far as it can. And in fact, the city of North Kansas City has done a lot of work to line its sanitary sewer mains to prevent inflow and infiltration. But we did see what we thought was a correlation last year on days when we had significant rainfall. It did seem that our measured flows were higher. But this year, it's not as clear to us. We are seeing some puzzling data that frankly, we're not entirely sure what to make of it. Based on 8 months of the data through this fiscal year, we're now projecting to spend about $325,000 more than last year, and then we budgeted on sewer charges that are paid to Kansas City for sewage treatment. And yet our revenue from sewer charges to our customers, we are projecting to come in slightly below budget. Also, measurements of the flows that city staff has provided to me seem to indicate that our flows through their master meter are down a little bit from last year, and yet our charges from Kansas City are going up greatly. We don't honestly know exactly what is causing this phenomenon. And we do think that we need to budget to get some expert help in, as I talked about in the memo, and I am planning on doing that in the budget that we'll be submitting to you next month. But for now, we do have a situation that we need to deal with on the sewer side. So last year, recently when we began having these problems with the WPC fund, we began a strategy of using the gaming fund to pay for capital projects in there, because we have had, as you may recall, some very significant repair issues in WPC. And so we have been using the gaming fund, in all honesty, to prop up the WPC fund on the capital side by transferring from gaming to pay for the capital projects in that fund. And we are proposing to continue doing that. And then another part of the strategy has been to increase sewer rates at a fairly high level and to work on doing that for a few years until the WPC fund reaches the desired level of 25% of budgeted expenses. But at the same time, what we have been doing for the last couple of years has been decreasing the city's water rates in order to try to offset the large sewer increases that we've put in place, which has resulted in relatively minor increases overall to the utility bills of our customers over the last few years. The city's water fund, as opposed to the WPC fund, is in good shape. If we did nothing with the rates, then we'd be projecting a 71% of budgeted operating expenses fund balance next year in the water fund. So we are again proposing a similar strategy as we've used the last couple of years, and this year that involves increasing sewer rates by 15% in calendar year 2021. The last couple of years we've increased it by 12%. We are estimating that that would leave a fund balance at the end of the next fiscal year of about 5% versus the hoped for 25%. At the same time, we are recommending decreasing water rates by 15% in the next calendar year, which according to our current estimates would leave us at about 52% of budgeted operating expenses, still well above the 25% level that is called for by policy. So if you did that, then according to the calculation that we have in your memo, this would result in an overall increase to utility bills of about 3.6% overall by increasing sewer by 15%, but decreasing water. It's not an ideal situation to have such a great imbalance between water and sewer, but our assumption is that you don't want to put these huge increases on the sewer side, that you would like to do something to help level off the increases that are brought on by the sewer increase. And so that is again what we're recommending in the next fiscal year. So we now will, I'll open it up for your questions and direction and in feedback in a moment. Once you have provided us direction, then we would plan to budget accordingly in next year's proposed budget. And then we would notice up a public hearing on the proposed change in sewer rates. So anytime you change sewer rates, you have to have a public hearing. So this would be not your final action, but it would be the action that we would count on for budgeting purposes. So I'm seeing a number of people raising their hand, and I'm not sure who raised it first, but I'm going to call on Councilmember Smith, and then Saper, and then Clevenger, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks for the rundown, Eric. Couple things from me. So you mentioned that the flows that we're measuring through our master meter are slightly down, but our rates are going up, or we're paying more. Has Kansas City Mo increased their rates, or is there just something that's messed up? And do they use the reading from our meter, or do they have their own that they're measuring the flows through?
They have not raised their rates, so that is not the cause of this year. In past years, they have increased their rates significantly, but we can't say that's the cause this year. They use the flows from our meter.
Okay, so they use the flows from our meter.
Yeah,
we're measuring less but paying more.
Yeah, and I wish I could tell you what is causing that.
Would the burden not be on them to tell us why it's higher? We can certainly work on having that conversation and seeing if we can get anywhere with them. But for now, and if there's ever, a way that we can make an adjustment because of some error on their part, which I don't have any reason at this time to believe there's any error on their part, we can do that. But for now, we are paying the bills that we're getting. Okay. Second question along these lines is, I understand the need to balance the funds. We did the 12 and 12 last year, 15 and 15 this year. Is there a reason that we couldn't just take a chunk and transfer from the water fund to the sewer fund to balance it, and then raise both at say 3.5% or 3%, so that we don't see that giant imbalance in how much water costs versus sewer?
Just one correction. In the previous 2 years, you've increased the sewer rate by 12%, but you've decreased the water rate by 5%.
Okay.
This year, I'm proposing something a little different. You could choose not to
raise the lower the rate, the water rate as much. I don't think it's good practice to simply transfer water or funds from water to sewer. They are separate enterprise funds, and we shouldn't just simply make transfers in that manner. We're doing that in a sense with the rates, but I don't think it's good practice for us to simply transfer funds from water to sewer in that manner. We should try to account for them separately.
Okay, so but you say that's what we're effectively doing by raising one and lowering the other, and it's creating a fairly significant imbalance between what water and sewer costs. I mean, generally cities, sewer's more expensive, but we're going to get, we're widening that gap. Is it worse to move money from one fund to the other because, it's bad accounting practice, or is it worse to have a severe imbalance in our two?
I think transferring would be the greater sin.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Eric.
So I'm sorry. I believe I should Councilmember Saper and then Councilmember Clevenger.
Yeah, you mentioned a study to try to figure out the enigma that you're dealing with in terms of lower flows but higher rates from Kansas City, or higher
Yes, sir.
charges.
Yes, sir.
How do you who would be paying for that? How?
Oh, the city would pay for it out of the WPC fund,
Uh,
or a combination of water and sewer. Actually, we would probably fund it out of both, because they would be looking at both our water and our sewer.
Since we've
rates.
done some of the capital costs out of the gaming fund, can we do this special study out of the gaming fund?
Yes, sir. Since we're funding capital projects, I think we could look at doing that. Yes, sir. And I would probably be, funding at least the WPC side of that through a transfer from the gaming fund.
Okay.
Councilmember Clevenger.
Jesse actually asked my question about having conversations with Kansas City to kind of maybe see if they have an idea of what's going on. Certainly with lower measured going through and higher costs, I'm not sure what's going on. And that's not something that I definitely want us to find out. So maybe some conversations with Kansas City, but that was my question. It's already been answered.
Who else? Councilmember Clark.
Hi, my guess is that it's the Kansas City consent decree. They're in violation of the EPA's Clean Water Act. And so they've had to pay quite a bit of fines for that. It's basically for every day they delay in infrastructure improvements, they get fined an X amount of dollars. That is not a pretty amount. That's my guess, because if we're paying into that, we're helping to maybe pay off, even though I'm looking at the consent decree and it does definitely stipulate that the defendant shall mean the city of Kansas City, Missouri. That doesn't necessarily mean it wouldn't trickle down to us if we're paying into that. They have to make some major improvements. So
it has trickled down to us in the form of rate increases from them in the last several years.
Right.
This year they were going to increase rates. In fact, we got a letter saying that rates were going up, and then they made a decision when the coronavirus crisis hit not to do that. But they have, in fact, that has been a large part of the reason that our rates have gone up significantly from Kansas City, Missouri in the last several years, but just not in the last year.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess that's for everybody's knowledge too, if they weren't aware of that. It's a major, major overhaul, and it doesn't, I'm for raising the rates for sewage. And okay with even the imbalance. I mean, someone that has a pool that likes to just, if I'm just paying water and not having to pay sewer to match that, obviously we work with the city to negate that. But yeah, I guess then to your point of saying that they didn't raise it this year, then we almost can assume there might be an additional raise that we need to kind of be prepared for that may go beyond that 5% gap that we're hoping for. I think you mentioned maybe a 5% sort of leftover, I guess, once we sort of pay the bill, if I understood you correctly, in raising the sewage rate.
In what we're trying as best we can to forecast for Kansas City, Missouri sewer fees next year, we are factoring in a significant increase from Kansas City. Those take place in May of each year, typically.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess that's my opinion. Is I don't know if we're ready to establish that, but I feel like I'm for raising that based on the fact that that's a major infrastructure overhaul that's only going to get more expensive until they meet all of these demands on the consent decree to kind of finalize that project. And also, I would love for us to extend education to the public about the proper use of their toilets in their homes and what to flush and what not to flush, because it's a huge deal. It's actually a really huge deal. If none of you have been to my house, I'm nearly outside of the bathroom door monitoring how much toilet paper is used, and absolutely no wipes go in my toilet. Like, it's a huge deal not to do that. And I don't know. I don't think that message is driven home enough, that only certain things belong in a toilet. Okay, I'm done.
Councilmember Tull. You're on mute, ma'am.
Yikes, sorry. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you said correctly before, because you said that there's nothing to say that KCMO is making an error, but we know that we have less flow and we're paying more. So if you feel like that's not an error on their side, what could we possibly be doing on our side to create that error?
I'd want to make sure that the data that's being reported to me is accurate as to flows. So I don't have evidence, in other words, that Kansas City, Missouri is doing anything wrong. I can't tell you, that's the reason that I say that. I without evidence, I can't make a claim like that.
Okay, but it's not matching the meter readings that you've seen.
That have been reported to me, no, that's correct.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Brian. I don't know if you can see me now.
No, we can't.
Okay.
But go ahead, sir.
Well, I do have a question. I was wondering, I thought, man, I'm moving down fast here. So the rates are comprised of more than just one thing. It's just not going through the flow and we're getting that rate. I mean, there's suspended solid, bio-auction demand, oil and grease surcharges as well. Is there any potential that any of these things are off? Because I know we had that discussion last 2 years ago, maybe. Are still collecting the proper surcharge on these things?
Right. I think our sewer surcharges are in good shape now. I don't think that's a significant part of our issue. It really does have to do with measured flows.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess I know those are driven off that as well. I just wasn't sure because I know there was a significant imbalance between what City of Missouri was charging us and what we were turning around charging the end user, or I guess in this case the beginning user. So okay, if we feel like we're in a good place there, then overall, I support raising. I mean, we have to raise it to meet what we're spending, and like she said, this is definitely a large part out of our control. And we talked about, I think we had a work session about this, I believe 3 years ago. Was it Burns and McDonald or someone was presenting to us about this and forecasted rates of a minimum is what we were guessing at the time, 15% a year. So now we're just kind of
yes, sir. And I forget the name of the consultant off the top of my head. It wasn't Burns and McDonald, but we did hire a firm. The problem, part of the problem with their analysis was that it was pre-mag meter, before the replacement of the mag meter. That issue all came to light very soon after they presented that report. And so the data became largely useless, but that is the kind of study that I would anticipate that we would do again to try to get a handle on what's happening and what we need to do.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, if not, what I am looking for, it's a work session, so we don't need a formal vote, but I'm kind of looking for a consensus opinion that staff can move forward to assume the rates that I have listed in the memo. Is in general the council find that acceptable? All right, and Councilmember DeLong, I hope we can get you on camera for the main session, because I'm going to have a hard time calling on you if I can't. Can you guys see me? Because I can't.
I can see you.
We can see.
Oh,
I
We
see
can see
him.
you.
oh, I'm sorry. Well,
You just have me blocked.
You do look like you're coming out of the light, though.
Heaven with that light behind you.
Hey,
Okay.
Eric, what do you
Yeah.
see? What do you see on your screen? What 9?
I am seeing a picture of me not on video.
Can you turn your video on and then back? It might bring
Can I
Bryant
do what?
up. If you turn your video on and then back off, it may bump Bryant up into that 9th spot.
All right.
Or we can tell you when he raises his hand.
Yeah,
I tried to use the raise hand.
No, we won't.
function.
We don't need to do this in open session. We'll go off air, and then I'll work with Stephen on this. But thank you for the direction on the matter of the water and the sewer rates. So if there's nothing else,
one thing
I'd like to. Councilmember Stewart.
That you're going to continue to investigate the discrepancy, I suppose.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Try to find out what's going on, and of course it didn't happen until we changed meters, did it?
All of our problems began when we changed meters. So I've been looking at whether there's something going on with that meter, even though it's only a few years old, would be one question to ask. Yeah.
That'd be like at a gas station, pumping 10 and paying for 15,
Yeah, no, it's a bad situation. Councilmember Smith.
And Eric, I just wanted to kind of bring the council up to date on what you and I discussed with the INI. That was a new term to me last year when we discussed it. And having that correlation with the rainfall was pretty significant to find out, what we can do to bring it down. So you had mentioned to me that we might bring on a consultant to help us understand where it's getting in, that there are smoke tests you can do to see where infiltration can happen. Possibly finding out if there's a way to check if private sump pumps are installed incorrectly and plumbed into the sewer. Amy, I know this is kind of your area of knowledge. Do you have any other ways that you know about INI coming in or tests for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's more a matter of just really doing like a stormwater analysis and getting an idea of like how we're managing stormwater as it falls, how many porous surfaces or imporous surfaces we have for this area. As we know, we need as much porous surfaces as possible so that rain can go somewhere. As soon as it hits like concrete, it sits there. So yeah, I think it's a much bigger study of how it could also affect our infrastructure. New projects, things going in. When you remove green space and put in buildings or put in parking lots, that actually can sometimes have a negative effect. So I think that's worthwhile taking a look when you're putting those things in. And that any new project going forward, if I'm going to tout a horn, even though I'm not connected to stormwater management right now, but is any new project going in needs to have some sort of major stormwater management or green space initiative associated with it. So
the issue with INI is that the stormwater manages to find a way into the sanitary sewer lines, and that is what INI or influent infiltration is. And as Councilmember Smith mentioned, we do actually have this year, and we are planning before the end of the fiscal year and next year as well, to do some smoke testing. That's when sort of inert gas is injected into the sanitary sewer lines, and then you have observers watching where it comes out, and that can tell you where you have illegal connections and such. Those can't be done citywide. You kind of have to do them in relatively small localized areas so that you can observe carefully. But we do have several of those planned over the next several years.
I guess,
Councilmember Clark.
I guess I'm curious, what happens if we identify that, say, when the city was structured and say my block, and we find out that drains and things like that are actually going to sewage instead of going to a stormwater? How is that remedied? Would that be on the resident, or how would that be, or there's no plan? It's just something that it's too early.
My answer would be that it is an illegal connection, and that certainly the city could make the resident responsible for correcting that problem. Some cities have been known to, if they have the funds, take on some of those costs. But and it is homes. Decades ago, it was not uncommon to simply connect them that way. That's now not acceptable practice, but given that some of the homes are older, that would be a council decision as to whether you hold that homeowner responsible for making the correction. It can be expensive, or whether you provide some financial assistance to them to do so.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
We need a motion to adjourn.
Yes, sir.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay.